very excited to get started today and take you all through this workshop for the next 40 minutes. We are going to be discussing today how to develop cross-channel user journeys that can 4x your revenue. A little bit about me before we get started. So my name's Elle. I'm the Senior Director of Customer Success at Iterable. I am extremely excited, or was extremely excited before the slightly bumpy start there, to be chatting to you all today, not least because this is the first time in about 2 years that I'm not in tracky bottoms and slippers delivering a presentation, so this makes a big change for me. You are probably all asking yourself, why is somebody in customer success talking to me about app marketing today? So it's a very good question. Let me do a quick intro from my side and explain why I'm up here chatting to you all today. So by way of introduction, I actually started my career as a marketer. I had the terrifying, at the time, job of sending the weekly newsletter to about 50,000 subscribers. At the time, the only personalization that I did in that email was first name, which I'm sure a lot of you can remember. After that, I actually decided to move agency side. I moved to Australia. I worked for a global loyalty marketing agency. And essentially, I worked with airlines and supermarkets to optimize and run their online loyalty programs. After that, I decided to immerse myself in technology. I moved to Silicon Valley, and I became really passionate about data and really innovative marketing tactics that would allow companies to automate and scale their messaging across a global reach of audiences, being able to deliver the right message to the right person at the right time on the right channel. Over the last 10 years, I've worked with about 500 plus brands across APAC, the Americas, and then most recently in EMEA to optimize their marketing strategy cross-channel at scale. I've seen and analyzed billions of emails that have gone out to consumers as well as mobile messaging as well. And most recently, I was given the opportunity to help launch Iterable's first international office in London. And I now lead the post-sales team, and we work with a really broad range of customers across EMEA, helping them do everything from onboarding to the Iterable product, to running their monthly strategy sessions, to talking to them about how they can make the most of our platform. So for those of you who aren't overly familiar with Iterable, we are a cross-channel customer experience platform that empowers marketers like yourselves to turn the moments that matter with their users into memorable experiences that drive loyalty and retention, all through sparking joy. So we do this through unparalleled data flexibility, which enables us to send real-time messages across multiple channels, including email, in-app, push, SMS, and direct mail. To put it into a bit of context, every month we're sending over 5 billion messages to over 2 billion users, and we're powering those by capturing over 30 billion custom events that our customers are sending to us. So very, very excited to talk to you today and share a little bit about how some of our customers are really leveraging Iterable to achieve cross-channel journeys, but also just share some of the things that I've learned along the way and hopefully answer any questions that you might have. So with that in mind, we are going to be covering a few different topics today. The first thing that we'll cover is the cross-channel journey. So we'll take a look at what cross-channel really is, how to start strategizing and building out your own cross-channel journey. Then we'll dig into the data side of the equation, which is super important. So we'll take a look at what data you can start gathering to develop a second-to-none cross-channel experience. And then we'll transition into a customer story, and I'll walk you through how one of our most recognized brands is leveraging their app and their cross-channel marketing strategy to build on their own user journey to maximize their revenue. Throughout the session today, we are going to leave time for discussions. There'll be a couple of polls. Please do feel free to put up your hand and ask a question, and we'll also leave time at the end today for a Q&A. So let's jump straight in. And before we get into the weeds of how to develop a best-in-class customer cross-channel journey, it's always really important to start with the what and the why. So we're going to tackle what do we actually mean when we say cross-channel, and why is this something that your team should invest in? So to me, cross-channel is really all about the user's evolving experience. It's not just about communicating over channels, but really about using them to support and unify the different steps, phases, and actions that comprise your entire customer experience from start to finish. So at Iterable, we often refer to this as the golden thread of messaging that's carefully woven through journeys to unify an experience. And you'll hear me come back to this idea of a golden thread a few times today. I think as marketers, we inherently know that we should be more cross-channel focused, but it's not always easy to prioritize that within our businesses. So, because we love data so much, here are a few stats. I'm sure most of these you've actually seen in the past, but if you haven't, these are the types of arguments that you can be making internally with your exec stakeholders to reinforce that cross-channel and the endeavor that goes into cross-channel is really something that's worth doing. So the Aberdeen Group recognizes and reports that brands with a strong cross-channel subscriber engagement strategy see an 89% retention rate across their user base. According to a study by Marketing Land, 49% of consumers buy from their favorite cross-channel brands at least once per week. And Forrester found that companies with a strong cross-channel subscriber engagement strategy see 10% year-on-year growth. Now, however you slice or dice the data, we truly believe that experience is the most important thing when it comes to acquiring, nurturing, and then reactivating and retaining your customers. So as you move, your messaging needs to follow. So let's talk now about how cross-channel applies to your customer journey as a part of a cohesive lifecycle mapping and messaging strategy. The first thing that we're going to do is map out the customer journey, as you can see here on the screen, and identify the different stages and milestones within it. Now, this is a very generalized B2C or B2B journey that we'll be using today, really just as an example. I know that your customer journey is going to be very unique to your own brand, so of course some definite nuances will start to appear, but hopefully this is a good foundation from which we can start today. So at Iterable, we tend to think about a customer journey and the different stages that make up that customer journey. And we think of that in 5 different buckets, and you'll see them reflected on the screen here. So the first bucket that you can see in the top right-hand corner is awareness. This is really when a user learns about your brand and your offerings. As you move round the circle, you'll see then we move into a consideration phase. And this is really that user moving closer to a purchase or a transaction and learning more about your brand. Who are you and why should they start to pull you into their lifestyle? Once we've had that consideration stage, hopefully they then move through to a purchase. This means that a user buys something or subscribes, if that's your business model, and really starts to bring your brand into their life. After that, we move through to the service and nurture, and this is really the phase in which you keep that relationship that you've just earned with your customer going, and you start to respond to the interactions and the behaviors that they're showing as they interact with your brand. And then lastly, we move through to the re-engagement phase. And this is really that phase where the customer hopefully comes back for more or converts if they haven't previously done so, or you can help to create advocacy so that they can spread that word of mouth about your brand and bring more people back into that awareness phase of the life cycle. So now that we've defined those 5 stages from an end user's perspective, let's layer on top of that the 3 stages that encompass the marketing side of the equation. So we tend to think about this as 3 categories on top of those 5 I just mentioned. The first is activation, and this is really where you're teaching a user or a new subscriber about your brand, your values, and the role that you can play in their lives, and helping them integrate your brand into their lifestyle. After that, we move through on the marketing side to nurture, and this is really where you help your user feel confident and commit to you as a brand. You might ask them to expel energy or capital with your brand, and typically what you'll want to be doing throughout this entire phase is nurturing them towards some sort of call to action, whether that be a subscription or potentially a transaction on your site. And then third, but definitely not least, we have the reactivation phase. And on the marketing side, that's really where we're keeping our users engaged after a transaction. We're building that brand affinity, and we're hoping that they will stay loyal to the brand and also give you a really fantastic reputation online. So to add to the layering, so this is the next step. Now we're going to define and add a layer on top. This is really all around those key moments that connect one leg of your journey to the next. So we consider these to be really highly marketable moments in each of the different stages that we've just talked through. Now, I've included some sample milestones in here, so you can see, for example, from an activation stage, you might have a new subscriber. When it comes through to nurture, maybe they've viewed something on your website or in your mobile app. And then on the reactivation side, maybe they've abandoned their basket or abandoned their view or session within your mobile app. So for each of these key moments, you'll then want to start thinking about how you respond, where you respond, when you respond, and also what you respond with. So from here, you can see then that we're starting to create that golden thread that we spoke about at the start of the session, making sure that your cross-channel strategy is really well informed and that it complements and speaks to one another as we go through that cyclical cycle. So you can see on the slide here, we've started to add icons of the different channels that either we expect the user to be engaging with us on, or the channels that we want to then in turn be engaging with them on. So the one big thing to call out is that especially over mobile, how you show up in these key moments and how they're interconnected with the rest of your strategy is really the difference between a good or a bad overall experience. So definitely encourage you all to start thinking and mapping out what your user journey looks like and then adding on these different layers that we've talked about today. So interestingly, the picture on the right, this is actually a picture of one of our customers, Fender, who built out their overall life cycle that they then shared in a presentation. They actually brought this whiteboard into the presentation and shared it during our flagship event at Activate. And this is really the way that we recommend turning those last 4 slides into actionable insights that you can then use to map out your own customer journey. You can whiteboard like Fender is doing. Customers often ask me, how should I actually go about doing this? Whiteboard is definitely one of the ways you could do it. You also don't need to get that fancy. You could do it on a piece of paper. I've done it before in an Excel sheet. Or if you wanted to get fancy, because we all want to get fancy from now a few times, but try using a tool like Lucidart or Mirrorboard to be able to map this out and then share it across your company and get that buy-in from the people that will ultimately be involved in making this happen. In addition to mapping out your customer journey, we also recommend that you ask not only your wider team, but also some of your customers a few sample questions that you can see on the board here if I go through them all for you. But these types of sample questions will really allow you to dig into your current customer lifecycle and also identify those areas of opportunity, both within your company, but also when it comes to your external experience as well with your customers. Great. So now that we've gone through the customer journey, I'm really interested to know, and perhaps I should have started with this question, but by a show of hands, who here has actually mapped out their customer journey? Okay, so a few of you, yeah, and some shaking hands as well. Anyone here hasn't done it yet, but is thinking about it? Okay, great. And anyone here that thinks, nah, this is probably a waste of time? Okay, great. I'm glad I got 0 hands for that one, but hopefully a few more hands by the end of the session for those of you that aren't yet doing this today, but really do want to start thinking about investing in this in the future. So when we start digging into customer journeys and customer experience, we really can't not talk about personalization. And in all honesty, I could probably do an entire other session just on personalization in its own bucket. But at its most basic, personalization really just means that you'll tailor the messages that you send to your end user based on the data that you've collected from them, either zero-party data or first-party data. Now, going a step further, you could therefore extrapolate that your personalization can only ever be as good as the data that you're collecting. So if you really want your customer journey to be effective and meaningful, it's really important that you're also understanding the data implications at each stage of that journey that we just walked through, and that you're weaving that data-driven decision-making into your planning as well as your ongoing strategy. So if we look at the customer journey through a data lens, we can see that the entire process is really an ongoing opportunity to learn more about who your customers are, how they engage, and what they want to hear from you. In today's marketing climate, it's all about a give-get, a reciprocation between you and your customer. So your customer knows that they're giving their data to you. So how is it they're earning your trust, and what are they getting back in return for giving you that data? So on the right-hand side, we can see the premise of what we'll be talking about in the next few slides, but really data is a driver of that cross-channel journey. As we acquire it, we really need to feed it back into the mix in different applications to heighten the experience and also enrich that communication that we have with the customer. Now, remember that being cross-channel doesn't just mean having the channels. Think back to the definition slide. It really means that you're evolving the experience and weaving that golden thread throughout those channels. Again, not just having them, but seeing how they're all interconnected and working together. So every touch point, every interaction is really a new opportunity for you to learn about your customers and then take those learnings and weave them back into your customer journey. So we've actually built out a really simplified example of this using a fake brand, don't worry. But I did want to walk you through what that might look like and also help you to then visualize what that could look like for your brand. So a really common entry point for any customer's journey is email capture. It's one of those starting moments that we talked about a few slides ago that can really set the stage for the customer experience that's about to come. You might not have a lot of information on the user at this stage. In fact, most likely you'll have almost nothing, but you can trigger a really timely welcome email off the back of it to make it feel personal to that user. And then in that email, you can ask them a number of questions that allow you to capture data back on them and then enrich the experience that happens after that initial email. So maybe you might want to ask them what their preferences are, how often they want to hear from you, what type of content they're interested in. You might also use this as an opportunity to have them download your mobile app. Now, one thing you'll notice on this screen is that we're really not asking for anything outside of an email address on this particular landing page. So the reason I wanted to use this as an example is it's actually a really good time at this moment to stop and think about what more you could be asking for on this landing page. How do you optimize and capture additional data points so that you can enrich that journey? For example, on here alongside the email address, we could also ask somebody to share their name with us. I've had a lot of people say, well, why do we want to capture that data? Is that not an infringement on privacy? One way to combat that, if you are worried about it internally, is let them know on this screen why you're capturing that information. And the reason is because you want to enrich their experience and be able to personalize these messages to them in the future. So let's move forward to the app download. Let's say that your user received your welcome email, they saw the call to action at the top of that email, and they downloaded your app. Now you can start to build around that experience that they're having in the app. As soon as a user engages across your app, you're able to get a much closer look at who they are, what they're interested in, and where they're browsing from, as well as the device that they're engaging with. So at that point, you could then trigger them into a very well thought out cross-channel app onboarding experience that expands on the email you've just sent, maybe pushes them a notification on their phone or shows them an in-app message. Remember that you are capturing this data so that you can enrich their experience down the line. So it's really important that we're also using that data that we've caught. From there, you can then weave that information back into your different strategy and formulation of messages so that you can set the stage for the next moment along the mobile journey. And that next moment might be the message opt-in. Now, mobile opt-in is an art, and unfortunately, I don't have a silver bullet or a magic formula that I can share with you today. But we would definitely speculate that there's a high correlation between a notification opt-in and the overall satisfaction that somebody has received with your brand up until that point. However, your engagement data is definitely your secret weapon to figuring out when and how to ask for that mobile opt-in. So depending on the nature of the app itself, maybe you ask for that opt-in as soon as they engage in their first session. Or for other apps, you might try and find out a little bit more about that user before you ask them to opt into your push notifications. So you might look at app engagement, messaging data that you're getting back from your app, as well as, are they opening and clicking my emails and my in-app notifications? What are they doing when it comes to the product data that I might have in my platform? And are they looking at the same items or categories? And could we use that to then influence the messages that we might send them via push? So once you've secured that opt-in, you have got a direct and instantaneous access and line of communication to your users. So it's a really highly flexible and personalized channel that has the power to pull users back into your app. And that's why very often when you look at your cross-channel strategy, requesting this opt-in and then using push notifications to engage is going to be a core part of that strategy. So lastly, let's say that we've reached the purchase or transaction stage. Firstly, congratulations, that's a big stage for someone to have made it to. But the journey is really far from finished at that stage. So cross-channel strategies have worked like a dream to get somebody to that point. But now let's make sure that we are continuing to engage with them over those channels and move them back around the wheel again from awareness to consideration to a second purchase. So if you think back to that data cycle that we shared at the beginning, you've acquired, applied, and now transacted. So now you can pay it forward and enrich that user. Consider using information to nurture them towards that second purchase, or maybe a complementary experience. So let's say that they bought a dress that you can see here on the screen. Other items in your summer collection that really complement that dress that you might want them to purchase alongside the first item that they've bought. And then speaking of delivery, how can you use your cross-channel strategy to really rally around that transaction and heighten the experience that somebody has when it comes to the delivery flow? So think about a cross-channel strategy that's focused on messages like status updates on their purchase, delivery notifications, asking for feedback, or if they are a loyal user of your brand, why not ask them to review it on another site so that they can spread that positive word of mouth? So that piece after the transaction is really important. I think in the last 2 years in particular, throughout the pandemic, that part of the customer lifecycle has really been heightened and worked on. And those are definitely learnings that we can take into this year and apply to the cross-channel strategy. So in terms of cross-channel, I'd love you all to put your hands up if you're sending email today. Okay, so most of you. Keep it raised if you're sending email and push. Great. What about email, push, and in-app? Okay, still a few, but definitely less. What about email, push, in-app, and SMS? Great. And then are you also sending direct mail? Okay. So it's really interesting when we start to go from email and then we tack on these additional channels. We're definitely email first as marketers. Email is still king. But you can see as you start to add on these additional channels and think about how they'll influence your brand and your user experience, you can really move more into this cross-channel world that we're talking about today. Okay, so let's revisit everything that we've covered today. We explored the customer journey, We've built a framework around how to market effectively within the stages of the life cycle. And we've highlighted those specific moments and data points that you should be capturing to further enrich that cross-channel strategy. So now we're going to drive that home by taking a look at a customer story and turn the concept that we've just talked about into more of a reality by showing you something that an Iterable customer is doing today. And that customer is Calm. Calm is a long-time Iterable customer, and they're very advanced when they come to their cross-channel approach. So it's a good example to look at today to see how they moved into cross-channel and also what they're doing. If you haven't heard of Calm before, I would highly recommend checking them out and downloading their app. They are the #1 app in the market today when it comes to sleep and meditation. I can personally say that their sleep stories are great and have definitely got me through a few stressful times in the last 2 years. On the marketing side, though, the Calm team are really deeply interested in the relationship between their journeys, as well as the data, the channels that they occupy, and therefore the experience that they're bringing to their consumers. And it makes sense, right? They're a massive brand. They have experienced massive growth, particularly in the last 2 years. And they've really mastered that relationship between themselves and their consumer, and they know how critical that is in sustaining the momentum that they have. So we're here at the App Promotion Summit together. I'm sure the chart on the right-hand side is something that you're all probably overly familiar with at this point. But it is the reality of the mobile app landscape, right? You spend a ton of money and effort on acquiring people to download your app, only to have them drop off and never come back and use the app again within a matter of days. Now, when Calm partnered with Iterable, they were really interested in connecting the data points behind this graph to really streamline the many facets of their customer experience. And as you can see on the left-hand side, they really then focused on that activation stage of the life cycle. They wanted to look at their onboarding efficiency that then moved through to the affinity that new users had with their app. And then lastly, how that made those users more sticky and coming back for repeat usage of the app. So to start with, they really began by investigating the performance of their existing onboarding journey. So they looked at their high-performing campaigns within those onboarding workflows and then looked for areas of insight and potential improvement that they could make. So on the right-hand side, you can see we've mocked up just a basic overview of one of the initial stages of their very first onboarding journeys. And you can see that what they're doing is after a user completes their first session in the app, they're then scheduling an email to follow up and recognize that user for having completed their first session. But what was really interesting is that their engagement data was showing that the first hour after somebody completed their first session was one of the most determining timeframes that would suggest whether they were going to come back into the app and be retained as a loyal user. They actually found that 80% of their first-time users weren't coming back after that first session, and that first hour was really critical for those users. Now, if you apply that learning to the workflow that they had initially, you can see that after sending that first email, they waited 2 days after that email was sent to then check and see whether that user had come back and done a second session. And really by that point, what they learned is that that opportunity window for retaining and bringing those users back to the app had long passed. So it was really effectively pointless at that stage in turning anything around for them. So how did they adapt? Well, you can see here that they found that their messaging approach wasn't entirely off base. So their emails were still engaging and providing to be effective to their users, but the timing was really off. So Calm effectively sped up, and I'm sure you can all probably think ahead to what they did next, but they effectively sped up their campaign flow. So their original onboarding campaign lapsed over a span of 27 days. But that timeline was really leaking users, which is exactly what the data showed. So knowing that, they tweaked it, they sped it up, and effectively they halved their campaign timeline from 27 days to 15 days. They optimized the delay between the messages to take advantage of those high engagement windows that they previously just hadn't been taking advantage of. So instead of waiting days to message a user, they waited hours. And ultimately, by changing the experience in this way and really adapting and messaging in the moments that mattered for their users, they increased their revenue by 4x what they had previously done, and also increased their retention rates as well as their new subscriptions. So that onboarding campaign then naturally set the stage for Calm to establish their value really early on with their users, and then provided them with the credibility that they needed to expand and grow into new channels as the experience unfolded. So you can see here just a few really basic examples of how Calm then moved into cross-channel from that first email and really started sending push notifications as well as in-app notifications that highlighted those additional key moments that they had identified within their lifecycle and built that one-to-one loyal connection with their users. So to close out the Calm case study today, I did want to share a quote with you all from Sue Cho, who is Calm's head of lifecycle marketing. And I think what she fed back to us really encapsulates most of what we're talking about today in this workshop. So she said, when thinking of how to optimize campaigns, my answer is always, it depends. I ought to look at the data. Iterable allows me to take insights across technologies and then apply informed changes that drive the most important metric, which is revenue. So, at the upshot of all of this, it really depends when you have a cross-channel strategy. Everything that we've discussed today will be applicable to your brand, but in what instance and to which degree? It will really depend on your brand, your app, your approach, your current channels and your new channels that you'll be looking into, as well as what your goals are for your marketing team, but also for your business. At the end of the day, for most of us, revenue is really the driver that we all care about the most. But we really believe at Iterable that revenue and customer experience go hand in hand. So that golden cross-channel thread becomes a really beautiful woven tapestry when you look at channels, moments, personalization and the data underpinning that, as well as the journeys that overlap and interlock as you move around that cyclical diagram. You win on experience, you become invaluable, and therefore that drives revenue. So I think we're almost up at time. We have covered a lot. Thank you for, first of all, bearing with me at the beginning for those technical challenges, but second of all, for sticking around and hearing me out today. Some top takeaways, if there's nothing else that you take away from this session. Firstly, really do map your customer journey. I saw about a third of the room put their hands up and say, yeah, we've done this. And then another third of the room saying, we haven't, but we're going to start thinking about it. To those 2/3 who haven't done this yet, please do think about this. It can be as basic as writing it down or jotting it down on a piece of paper, or as fancy as mocking it up in a tool like Miraboard. Learn from what you see when you analyze your existing customer journeys. And then that'll pay off when you look at things like engagement, sessions, when are people purchasing, when are they coming back. Put yourself in your user's shoes, experience the journey that they're going through, and then evaluate the performance of various different touch points across that journey to figure out how you can improve. And then remember all of those moments that we've identified and identify the ones that are most important to you, to your brand, and to your customers. And also know that certain messages resonate differently over different channels. So lean into the channels that you have. Start thinking about how you can add new channels into that journey. Where are your users engaging with you? Over what medium are you responding in kind? And then lastly, data is a critical piece of the experience. But don't just trust it blindly. Make sure that as the marketer, as the creator, that you're letting the data help you evaluate, but don't let it remove that human element from your customer journey either. So we do have a couple of minutes for a Q&A. If anyone has any questions at this point, Anyone at all brave enough to put their hand up? Yeah, go for it.
We're just launching an app at the moment, so we're trying to map out like early customer journey. What's your recommend for this very, very starting point and actually have something to learn?
Yeah, have you launched your app already?
Not yet.
Okay.
MVP.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And can I ask, will the majority of the sort of user engagement happen over the app, or is it still primarily web driven and then the app is just complementary to that engagement?
Yeah, app's primary.
Okay, great. Yeah. Okay, super. I mean, what I would suggest doing is similar to mapping out your customer journey, map out the various different aspects of your app. So you might have 3 different pages that they engage over. Maybe one's a welcome screen, one might be a basket, and the other is maybe a catalog page. Have those mapped out and then identify what your users will be doing on those pages and also what those pages are driving them to do as well. Is your catalog driving them to make a purchase? Is your welcome screen really driving them to learn more about your brand? So then the first thing is understanding what are you trying to get out of the user at each of those different places in your app. And from there, I would then think about, okay, how does this tie into our web experience as well as our email experience? So start to kind of create that thread that we were just talking about before. And then apply that, overlay that with the customer journey. So start thinking about those key moments. Will they happen in the app that you've just identified? Do they happen on the web? Is that a key moment that will happen in email? And you can start to connect it that way. But I'd say start simple. Just understand what users will be doing in your app and what you're asking of them, and in turn what they'll be asking of you, and then be able to map that out in accordance with your existing customer journey that you have on the web. Any other questions at this stage? Yes?
In terms of your kind of omnichannel approach, how necessary do you think it is that your app experience from a UI perspective matches your web experience? Do you think they can be quite different, or do they need to?
Personally, I think they need to almost mirror each other. It's one brand, one experience. You want to make sure that if somebody is going from an email to your website to your mobile app, that they have that kind of cohesive, yes, exactly, that consistent messaging. They know who you are, and that's then sort of speaking from every different channel that they're engaging on. So, I mean, that's just my personal opinion, but I think it's very important. Yeah. So I know we're over time. Thank you so much for the questions. If anyone wants to chat to us after this, we do have a booth. We also have a chance for someone to win a Super Nintendo Classic console. So please come and stop by and enter into that draw. Don't forget to take the pamphlets and the flyers on your chair. We have a case study online for Calm if you want to read about it a bit more. And then last but not least, next week we're hosting an event at the Ned. So if you want to continue the conversation either about CrossChannel or learn more about Iterable, please come and join us there. Completely complimentary event, and we'd love to see you there. It's next week on Wednesday from 6 till 9 p.m. And you can learn more at our booth.